Hello everyone and welcome to today's WorkSafe Tasmania Month webinar. I'm Stephanie from WorkSafe Tasmania. Before we start, please take a moment to read the following slide about information received today. To interact in today's webinar, please use your control panel to type and submit your questions. Questions will be answered at the end of today's webinar. Today, webcams will be used only by the moderator and the presenter, and today's presentation is being recorded. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Duncan Giblin, Cancer Prevention Team Leader at Cancer Council Tasmania. Duncan has a strong focus on increasing awareness of occupational health risk and increasing people's confidence in adopting behavioural change. He is a sitting member on the National Cancer Council Australia Occupational and Environmental Cancers Committee, OECC. He has previously worked in the civil construction, fishing and building industries, and says this background is his motivation to help workplaces and workers make better health-based choices. Welcome, Duncan.
Good day, everyone, and I'd like to say, welcome and thank you for taking the time to learn more about cancer prevention in the workplace. On behalf of Cancer Council Tasmania, we would like to acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal people, the traditional custodians of the different areas of land on which we meet today, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We also extend that respect to the first Australians who are present today. We'd also like to thank WorkSafe Tas for inviting us along to participate in this series of presentations as part of WorkSafe Tasmania Month. And I'll just go through a quick summary of the Cancer Council about our organisation. So we provide a range of supportive care programs for the people affected by cancer, and that can be a range of practical supports all the way through to transport to treatment. For example, last year, our transport treatment cars took people to a range of different appointments, which actually made up enough kilometres to go around the globe 6.5 times. So it's a bit of an interesting fact about just one of the things we do. We deliver cancer prevention programs that educate Tasmanians on how to reduce their cancer risk, and that's in a really broad range of settings. So that can be in schools, through our online and our marketing campaigns, or with workplaces or community groups. We also fund local cancer research projects and provide a respected voice for people affected by cancer through our advocacy work. More than 85% of our funding comes through donations and events, and everything raised in Tasmania and all this goes to services delivered directly in Tasmania. So, so just recapping on that, we provide support for people affected by cancer, cancer education and prevention, and cancer research. And in Tasmania, we have nearly 10 people a day now are diagnosed with cancer. And what we also want people to know is that, a third of these cancers can actually be prevented through lifestyle choices, which can also help reduce the cancer risk, can help reduce health risk of other chronic diseases. This includes reducing and managing exposure to workplace carcinogens. Given the number of Tasmanians that are affected by cancer, we know that many of us have our own connection to cancer that is either personal or linked to a family or friend. And if anyone is feeling that something is triggering today that we're talking about, please take the time out of the presentation if you need to, and you can also contact Cancer Council directly if you need support services or information about further support. We talk to people about a range of different topics to help them reduce their cancer risk. We talk about being sun smart, diet and exercise, drinking less alcohol, early detection through screening and health checks, and quitting smoking. Today we're focusing on limiting workplace exposures and the communication strategies that help teams make that change. We will look briefly at the size and the impacts of cancer in the workplace, and then look at the communication techniques that help the team to understand and reduce the risk and make positive change through developing a strong communication plan. We're aware that there is a broad range of organisation size and capacity within the audience today, and this presentation focuses on some principles and strategies that are feasible and scalable for organisations of all levels. So what is a workplace carcinogen? Carcinogens are cancer-causing agents, and within workplaces there are many different carcinogens that a worker may be exposed to. Workers are exposed to these agents at higher concentrations and for longer periods than the general population, which is why it's important to have a strong risk management approach to workplace exposure to cancer-causing agents. The World Health Organization has identified at least 201 known probable carcinogens that can be found in the workplace. And then if we look at how big is the problem, how many people are potentially exposed to cancer-causing agents at work, and how big is the problem in Australia? So it's estimated that 3.6 million workers are potentially exposed to workplace carcinogens, and these come in a broad range of exposures. So if we go through a few of those, just some basic examples. So tobacco, benzenes in fuels, wood dust, and when we're talking about wood dust, this also includes some of the glues that are used in processing fabricated wood products. Lead, and particularly found in paint, but also other substrates. Welding fumes, and also with welding, it's also the UV exposure from welding as well. Asbestos, and we're learning a lot more about the impact of silica dust. Diesel engine exhaust, and radiation, including UV radiation. This list here is certainly not an exhaustive list, and understanding the risk specific to your workplace is critical to developing effective management strategies. You can't fix a problem if you aren't aware of it. If you're unsure about what risks might be in your workplace, seek clarification from WorkSafe TAS, a registered workplace safety auditor, or a registered occupational hygienist. But really understanding the risks that might be specific to your workplace is critical. And so what's the impact? Outside of the financial impact to the community, which is around $30 million per year nationally, the impact on the health budget, one of the key things that we want people to consider is the personal impact of a workplace-related cancer diagnosis and what that would mean. And the other thing we want people to think about is, why is workplace cancer protection not always managed in the same way as the protective strategies for a physical trauma-based injury? And the answer to that is often the time from exposure to the development of cancer can be delayed by a considerable time frame, although not always. Sometimes disease can develop quite quickly post-exposure, but generally there's a longer time frame from exposure to diagnosis, and being seen as tomorrow's problem can be, excuse me, a huge barrier to maintaining the right protective approaches. Less immediate impact on individuals as workers and less immediate accountability and impact for supervisors and organisations can contribute sometimes to cancer safety practices being on a lower priority. So I guess in response to that, what we ask people to consider is what would be the impact for you or your organisation if you were told that you or one of your workers have cancer from something they're exposed to at work. Even if the impact isn't immediate, one of the things we ask people to look at is what a diagnosis would look like in each decade of their life. So, for example, in our 20s, which we're seeing some fairly significant issues with silica, in our 30s and each decade after, what would be the financial and lifestyle impacts for individuals and organisations affected by cancer diagnosis that could have been preventable at work? So waiting for next slide. I'll just try and click that through, Steph. Yep. So looking at the personal impact, Dennis is someone that approached us who wanted to share his story. Even if illness is delayed, the impact is still life-changing. So Dennis worked in heavy industry when he was younger. When he retired, he noticed his breathing had become more problematic. He was told he had lung cancer in the form of mesothelioma caused by workplace asbestos exposure decades ago when he was an apprentice. And the message Dennis has asked us to share is to learn from that what we now know about workplace cancers and what we can do and why it's important to make that a primary focus. Again, it's important to remember that it's not just later in life that people are diagnosed. There are people that have significant impacts on their health from exposure to workplace cancer-causing agents in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And that is often significantly life-changing, even if they have successful treatment. So when we look at how we manage workplace cancer, the simple question is who is responsible? And the answer to that is everyone. Workplace safety is the responsibility of both employers and employees. Employees have a legal responsibility to provide a safe place to work. Employees have the responsibility to follow workplace safety procedures to keep themselves safe as well as those working around them. And if you're concerned or unsure about how to keep your workplace safe, talk to your workplace supervisor, your workplace health and safety representative or union representative or WorkSafe TAS. And then looking at what we can do, understanding how to reduce workplace cancer risk requires understanding the risks and the risk management settings that are really unique to your workforce and your work environment. And I'm going to go to the hierarchy of risk, which I know most people are familiar with, but I think looking at them in a cancer-based context can be helpful. So if we look at what are some of the examples of reducing a risk at the elimination stage? This could be no longer using engineered stone to avoid silica exposure. And if we look at the substitution stage, you could use pesticides that are carcinogen-free, for example. So engineering controls, how can you reduce your risk there? You could provide portable vacuum cleaners with the appropriate and recommended filtration for the substance that you're concerned about. Administrative control, so this So when you're talking about with administrative controls, this could be training workers to identify hazard and risk and monitor exposures. And also with what we're about to go into when we talk about developing a communication strategy for managing a cancer risk, this also comes under administrative controls. And then lastly, we have personal protective equipment, and that is really the last line of defence. So looking at all other ranges and options that you can use to reduce your exposure to workplace cancers is critical. So a lot of people we talk to see it the other way around, and they feel that PPE is actually the only protective method available to them. So although a lot of people are familiar with the hierarchy of risk, I think it's really important to go through that just so people can see at all different levels of risk management how cancer control can be put in place. And then one of the things that, these are just broad examples. So what we want people to do is have a really, I guess, good investigation about what's specific for their workplace. Once you have strategies in place, how do you ensure your team understand and more critically act on the risk? So we look at making positive change. So the next step is, once you're clear on your risks and what your strategies are, is to make a plan on how to communicate with and support your team to make positive changes to reduce that risk. It's important to remember that awareness of risk, although important, is only one part of the solution. What we know is that a more planned and I guess multi-layered messaging strategy, multiple points of reference, is more likely to be successful. And we'll look at some of the elements, communication strategies and principles that help make up a strategy for making positive change in your workplace. So developing a communication plan. Before you go about your comms or plan, you need to understand the things that may be impediments to adopting best practice in your workplace, and what is specific to you, what are the specific risks. And these might be things like time pressure. This could be workers' perception or even management expectations. So sometimes it's about working with all layers of the workforce. Incorrect beliefs about risk. This could be from myths or people's existing bias. Workplace culture. Is there a lack of value placed on safety? Is time pressure a large impediment, which we kind of mentioned before, but that is often a reason why people give us feedback about why they may not use a particular protective strategy. Incomplete knowledge around the best safety practice and procedures and regulations, and habit. And this is really heavily overlooked in managing behavioural change, and it's one of the most, I guess, problematic things too, because people will do things automatically because that's how they've learned how to do things. So coming up with understanding how much, people are affected by either the things that they think or how often they've continually done something before will help you come up with your ideas around developing your communication plan. And then that helps you then design the plan. And to maximise the effect of your safety communications, having a clear plan to follow best practice, this will give you strategic and actionable goals rather than just sending out ad hoc communication at random. Your plan should identify critical community safety topics and how and when you will communicate them, and the how and when we'll talk about a little bit more about why that frequency is important. Think about the things you feel that are specific to your workplace, then look at what is your main peak communication tool. So how are you going to convey the importance of that message? And then, for example, one of the things you might find in your investigation is that there are some workplace culture issues around safety, and you could explore some mentoring opportunities for senior workers and getting them to be more involved in some of the education and provide extra training for them to do that. And I've got a question for people. Why do advertisers regularly place ads? It's not because you aren't aware of their product. It's because they know the more you see their product, the more likely you are to form the habit that they want you to. And another question is, would you still be aware of Coke if you only saw one ad as a kid? So essentially what you're trying to do is develop a health education campaign that uses some of the same principles as advertisers do, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go forward. So you then deploy that strategy. And when you do that, setting a time frame and expectations with the whole team is really important. So people understand why you're having that education, what the purpose is and what the expected outcomes are. Work out where in the year you'll have a peak saturation part or component of your communication plan, and what your ongoing and permanent touchstone messages are. In the next few upcoming slides, we'll look at these principles that can increase effectiveness of relevance of your communication strategy by thinking about message frequency. And again, I think it's good for people to think about, you know, the principles that advertisers do. Why do they use multiple message tools to reach us? And then reviewing your communication strategy. When you initially deploy it, it's important to set a review time in and try and work out how effective the strategy is, and finding out what is working well and also what needs more work to help keep the team on track, and get feedback from the team around things. So if you're still seeing issues around compliance, one of the things that it is critical to do is to actually investigate that. Why? Not make assumptions. And most people do that pretty well in workplaces when they're working with their team. And then reviewing success and areas for growth, and then using that to, I guess, keep your plan current and relevant. And when you do this, try and work with the team to find out why things aren't working and why something has been helpful to them. And repeat, if your risk hasn't gone away, then your messaging needs to remain in place. Messaging needs to be ongoing. I've been to quite a few places, and you know, one of the things we might be told is, well, we told them about this a couple of years ago, but they're still not doing this properly. And I think with any kind of behavioural change and also ongoing management of risk, it is important to have frequent messaging. And again, a lot of people are aware of this, but sometimes it does get missed. And then, so we're looking at campaign intent. So when you do your campaign design, is really understanding what are the key things that you really need to be there, and looking at campaign design. We advise working out a critical purpose, and as part of that, that includes the evidence behind the risk. This helps the team understand the intent of the campaign is about their well-being, and it comes from a strong evidence base. So they know that the risk is real, essentially, and that they also know that the protective strategies are going to be effective. Communication impact. So having some planning around your impacts, communicating the impact of not meeting required safety strategies is really important. You know, what are the workplace consequences? What are the personal and individual consequences? And what does that look like for the team, the individual, and the organisation? And also equally looking at asking them what the positive impacts of compliance are. There's been some really interesting research in what we talk about gain frame versus negative impact messaging, and they actually relate to different parts of the brain. And so for some people, a gain framed motivation will actually provide a higher likelihood of compliance. But in saying that, there are very real world consequences for not being compliant. So helping people understand the significant impacts of not being compliant is quite critical. But providing positive motivation has equal weight in the campaigns that we do when we work with people. Ask your team too about, what they think these impacts might be. Getting them to identify the impacts means that they have more investment in some of the solutions. And this leads on to benefits. So the benefits of meeting best practice, what are the positive effects? Again, get the team to come up with some of these. What do you think the benefit of getting the team to identify these is? And the answer to that is that the part of our brain that we use when we're responding to questions or solutions or problem solving actually provides more retained learning than when we're being told something. And a lot of the principles for this strategy actually comes from evidence base around motivational interviewing and other health promotion techniques. So looking at campaign intent still, one of the other things we really like people to understand is what are the expectations. So if you're communicating really clearly the protective strategies that are critical for managing the risk and the workplace expectations around them, what are the actions that your team are going to be required to do? So if all of those things are part of your communication plan, and you look at the different tools that you might use to convey those, you're covering a lot of the critical areas that will help that communication or the intent of that communication be adopted within the workplace. Which earlier we talked about looking at communication frequency. So you probably don't have the time or the resources to be delivering weekly education sessions on single workplace safety strategies. So planning a key awareness activity supported by regular reminders is a proven strategy for increasing awareness and changing habits. For an example, whenever Cancer Council is trying to encourage the community to engage in a positive health-based behaviour, we might do a TV campaign, but we'll also do some social media stuff. And then we will work with communities where there's, like in a face-to-face setting, where there's a live opportunity to engage with people, and that would be based on evidence around higher needs. If you're managing a communication strategy in a workplace, that can look a bit different. So you might add to your communication contact, you might add toolbox chats. You might also add signage in key areas with high visibility, also considering placement where the higher risk activities are taking place. And that's actually quite critical when you look at breaking habit, because again, often if what we're doing is automatic, if there's a reminder there that's there when we're about to do what we would normally do, we're more likely to break a habit. And that seems really self-explanatory. And again, a lot of workplaces we see do that really well. But a lot of other places you might go into in the PPE signage, for example, or the risk reporting signage is at the front access of the building, and not always at the risk-based activity sites. posters and other printed assets serve as touchstone messages, and look, a recommendation we have is toilets and lunchrooms give you a really captive audience. So again, what we're doing is talking about having multiple points of contact for the message that you want to have. And again, yeah, a really useful tool for that can be staff communication. So if you're sending out staff newsletters or emails, having articles to remind of key health and safety messages is another useful tool. And when you're thinking about which of those tools you might use is thinking about what are the key things you want your team to be aware of that come from your peak education action, whether it's someone delivering a presentation to your staff or whether it's some workplace mentoring around safety things, looking at things that support your key messaging. And that's how advertising and marketing touchstone messages work, and it's a really effective tool for workplace change as well. So secondary and touchstone messaging reminds people of the critical learnings from your peak messaging, essentially. It's recommended that you conduct at least one major message activity annually on key topics and plan how you will use reminders throughout the rest of the year. Key considerations of peak activity that may be associated with certain risks. So when we talk to people about managing UV radiation risk, for example, we talk to people about doing something at the beginning of the UV peak season. So that's just an example. There's a mixture of permanent peak and regular messaging in this example, but there are lots of different tools you can use to remind people of what you want them to be doing and what your key safety message is. So communication principles. When communicating with team members or staff, it's important to understand that there's some evidence-based principles that specifically that can be used to address the specific needs of your workforce. It's easy just to assume that people don't care or aren't motivated to do the right thing, but often there are other reasons. So if you go back to the communication plan where we talked about investigating, is thinking about how you would adopt the principles we're about to go through to address some of the key things that are the findings of why people do and don't do things in your workplace. So understanding those barriers and looking at the settings that are unique to your workplace. So first communication that we talk about, and it kind of covers some of the stuff that we looked at before, and is a bit of a summary, is being clear about consequences, but also be positive and game framed about the positive impacts of the safety strategy. Again, people are often more likely to do something if there's a benefit to them. If we go back to that example around the research around I guess like consequence-based messaging versus positive or gain frame messaging. So they did a whole lot of tests with lab mice around giving them a particular task, and where there was something that was adverse, to guide them to the right area of the task. It used the stress elements of the brain, and when there was something that was positive, it used the reward part of the brain, and we're no different to that. So some people will respond really well to the adverse, but also keeping things positive and game framed about compliance. I know I've kind of reiterated that a bit, but I think it's a really critical point. Conveying the shared risk and impact on others. So helping people understand that it's not just about compliance, something they have to do, is that their obligation as part of a team. And again, a lot of workplaces we go to, they do this really well, and some of this stuff will just be reinforcing things that people are doing really well. But again, if you're a team leader in a small organisation and you're not someone that's a trained safety manager, you know, sometimes just having a look at these principles and reviewing what you're doing can help you come up with different strategies. And the shared risk one and impact on others is actually really important, and helping them to understand, you know, that the impacts are often greater than the individual. So for, you know, if they have an injury, fines or exposure, that has a negative effect on the whole team, but also they might be exposing other team members to the risk. And invite contribution to solutions from the team. So again, talking about getting the team to come up with ideas. The more contribution to solutions that come from the team, the greater the understanding of the problem and the greater their role in being part of the solution is likely to be. And then using, as we discussed, using a broad range of communication tools at different times. So people have a range of different learning styles and different things work for different people. As discussed, don't just think a one-off talk or a poster will be enough to encourage regular change. It won't. If advertisers thought that would work, they would only do one message. If the risk is ongoing, the communication needs to be ongoing and regular, and that's a real key takeaway point that we want, because often when in a workplace you have so many competing demands that it's easy to focus on one thing and then focus on the next thing. But when you do that, it's important to keep some other key messages around what your primary focus has been on before. We talked to the team about, this is a quote we get quite a bit, we talked to the team about this last year and they still don't do it properly. So how does that sit with what we know about habit change and what you need, I guess, to encourage habit change? And looking at habit change, so habit change journey, so plans versus reality. My take on it is plans are what happen when life doesn't get in the way. Making changes is not often a perfect and simple trajectory. So wherever you're starting from and wherever you want to get to, it's important to remember. So that slide was a bit slow. So when you're working towards a goal, it's not a perfect and straight line trajectory. Often what you'll find is there are lots of ups and downs on the way, and the important thing to remember is that you're still making progress. Even through that, you're not back at the beginning. You might just need to be reviewing your strategy, just be prepared to deal with setbacks, but you might need to even look at your message frequency if you feel like you're not getting to where you want to be going with that. So that's, I guess, the main points of the presentation. So I'll hand back over to Steph, who can field some questions.
Thank you, Duncan Giblin from Cancer Council Tasmania for your presentation today. So yes, as Duncan said, if anyone does have any questions, please use your control panel to type and submit those questions. So Duncan, you talked in great length about preventing cancer in the workplace. Are you able to briefly touch on approaches that workplaces, employers would take if in the workplace if a staff member is undergoing cancer treatment?
Yeah, so we provide support services. So if someone is affected by cancer, they could access the support services at Cancer Council, and that is like there's quite a broad range of services there. So that can include really practical things like helping them actually understand the diagnosis and the treatment. We also provide things like helping people work out some of their financial planning. And we also will provide access to support to get into treatment. It's just also just actually talking to someone about the emotional impact of a diagnosis. And there's also a range of complementary and support therapies, and also support groups are available. So people can engage with those groups to I guess, have someone with a shared experience, which can help them work through the impact of that.
Thanks, Duncan. There's still time to submit questions for today's webinar presentation, which has been run as part of WorkSafe Tasmania month. Please head to worksafe.tas.gov.au to see what other webinars we do have running this week. Next week we kick off our in-person events, so do head to the worksafe.tas.gov.au website to find out what else we are running this October. With no further questions coming through, Duncan, I'll begin to close today's webinar. So thank you to today's presenter, Duncan Giblin, Cancer Prevention Team Leader at Cancer Council Tasmania. Today's webinar is part of WorkSafe Tasmania month. WorkSafe month runs throughout the month of October. Today's presentation is funded by the Work Cover Tasmania Board and delivered by WorkSafe Tasmania. Thank you, Duncan, for your presentation, and thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you.